Hey, what's up guys? This has been one hell of a week so far, and safe to say I don't think anyone really expected it to be quite as dramatic of a reaction as this. So as you're probably aware, most colleges throughout the country and probably around the world as well have switched all of a sudden to an online only model, and a lot of students are affected, especially if you are studying animation or computer graphics or anything that is involving a computer. If you're watching this channel, you already know you need pretty powerful computers to be able to do this type of work. So right now a lot of colleges are on spring break and they're saying, hey, well, students are on their own for hardware. We might be able to figure out software licensing. A lot of companies have also offered up free licensing during this crisis, but if you are looking for a computer and you don't have one, you're kind of out of luck. I got an email from a student yesterday asking for help picking out some components to build a computer that would be good for this type of work, for animation, visual effects, computer graphics. So his budget was $2,000, so I came up with a list, and I want to share that list with you guys as well today. So $2,000 will give you a pretty decent budget rig, and I say budget because $2,000 might seem like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But for these types of computers, you can easily go way beyond that. So for this, we're talking about building your own components. We're not looking at pre-built rigs. If you put them together yourself, you generally save quite a bit of money. You also have a lot more choice when it comes to customization. So for this budget, I have done my best to fit around $2,000. We're probably going to go over just a little bit. This is budget oriented, but I'm not just choosing the absolute cheapest components I can find. I'm trying to use my knowledge of building computers or putting them together for years and years. I've done it all my life, and I have things that I look for, things that will make the computer last longer or at least be more robust and expandable in the future. If you guys have other recommendations at the end of this video, just post something in the comments, no problem. I only spent a couple hours looking at these, tried to find the best reviews and things like that. Also, if you would like to see more of an Intel-centric model, this is going to be just AMD, but if you'd like to see Intel, drop some comments and I might consider doing that in the future. I don't really have any preference to hardware, it just depends. The last couple rigs I've had, they've been Intel only, but before that they were all AMD. It just depends, whatever is the best deal at the time. All right, if that sounds interesting, let's get started. A lot of students often ask me, what laptop they can buy to do computer graphic stuff, and I always say that laptops really are not a good idea. And the reason is, the only advantage of a laptop really is it's portable, but you'll end up paying like twice as much for a laptop than you would for a desktop that has the same amount of power. And a desktop is always going to be more robust. It's going to last you longer. The only disadvantage is, of course, that it takes up more space and it's not portable. But for this, I'm not even considering laptops because they are nowhere near the $2,000 budget. You bought a $2,000 laptop, it would not perform anywhere near as a $2,000 desktop. So when you're searching for hardware, what I would recommend that you do is check out these sites. So my first choice here is Newegg, just to search for things. You get a lot, they only do computer hardware and like tech stuff. You'll often find cheaper prices on Amazon though, and in my opinion, now there's no real reason to choose Newegg because you have to pay tax no matter where you live. When Amazon, you also have to pay tax. There's also B&H. So B&H is mostly known for its photography equipment, but they also sell computer hardware, and if you live outside of New York, you can usually get away without having to pay tax, okay? I mean, of course you'll pay tax at the end of the year, right? Let's actually just start with Amazon, and then we'll go through there. So you often find a lot of reviews here on Newegg. The search is a lot easier to use, but for this I'm just gonna use Amazon because I've already found these links. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is determine the CPU. I would choose an AMD Ryzen 9 3900X. This is about $100 cheaper than on Newegg, so I would leap at this decision here. So this is a 12-core, 24-thread CPU. This is going to be a very, very good CPU for rendering and multitasking, anything production related. If this is a little bit outside of your price point and you're looking to cut down where you can, my second choice would be the Ryzen 7 3800X. So the 3800X is only an 8-core or 16-thread CPU. It's still a very good CPU, and it's quite fast as well. It has its base clock is I think 3.9 gigahertz. If it will show us something down here. We type in the same thing in Newegg, I'm sure you can find something that's a little bit better. Newegg often gives you just more information about specifications. So this is 3.9 gigahertz. You can also view the specs, the specifications tab. It gives you a lot of information. Now, something else to keep in mind with this, both of these CPUs only have 2 memory channels, so if you are looking at getting a lot of RAM, or you want to be able to expand your RAM in the future, maybe go to like 128 gigs, for example, you're limited with the number of slots that this will actually utilize. So it's only going to do 2 channels, so usually that's 4 DIMM slots, as opposed to 4 channels or 8 DIMM slots. So just keep that in mind. Often cheaper CPUs, because these are relatively cheap when you take into account their performance, it's usually things like the cache is smaller or doesn't have as much memory support, basically, in terms of channels. But going back to this, the price difference is less than $100. I would go for the Ryzen 9 3900X. This is going to be a better CPU. The second thing is, for both of these CPUs, you need to be able to cool them. So I would go with a AIO Corsair H100i. They offer several different versions of these with different sizes. So this is a 240mm radiator, and this is going to fit in slightly smaller cases. So the case that I have chosen as my recommendation, I think this is going to be the maximum size, but you can go bigger, or you can do something more like a 280. I have a 281, it's an H115i, but this is going to provide better cooling than a fan. So the stock fan that comes with the CPU is just not really good enough. These are going to be pretty quiet, and they do provide better cooling. And I wouldn't worry with the fact that it is a water cooler. You don't have to maintain these. You can't flush out the coolant. It's locked. You can't really do anything. They don't leak. I've never had a problem with them, so this is what I would recommend. So the next thing here is the RAM. I'm going to go back to Newegg for this one. So when choosing RAM, you gotta look at a few things. First of all, I would stay away from companies I've never even heard of. If you guys are watching this video though, you probably don't know what you're doing. So Corsair is a good company. They make a lot of hardware. G.Skill does a lot of RAM. Never actually used G.Skill. I've used AMD. I've also used Ballistix. The second thing is you pay more for RGB. So if you want that, great. If you don't care, then what I would go for is higher capacity sticks. For example, here, this is going to be a 64 gig and there's 2 32 gigabyte sticks. I would choose 32 gig sticks over 16 gig sticks, especially for these CPUs, because these are more limited on their memory channels. So if you want to be able to upgrade to like 128 gigs in the future, all you have to do is buy 2 32 gig sticks instead of having to buy an entire kit again. The speed of these is 3200. I would not buy anything faster than this. This is going to be fine. If you want to play around with the BIOS and increase the CPU speeds and things like that, then RAM speed matters a little bit more. But you can go really in depth looking at latency and stuff like this and voltage, and it honestly, if you just want to plug and play, I think this is going to be a good amount of RAM. You could go with 32 gigs, and in that case, I would just go with a single DIMM slot. So I would just go with a single 32 gig stick. However, for production, 32 gigabytes, in my opinion, is not sufficient anymore. If you were looking for something just to get yourself running, 32 gigs will at least operate, but if you want this to be useful in a couple years and even be able to perform really well in things like Substance Designer or anything that's handling a lot of texture work or very high poly models, I would highly recommend going with 64 gigs as a kind of a minimum. I have 128 gigs, I've had that for about 2 years now, and it seems overkill, but I can run a lot of applications at once, and even then I sometimes max out the memory. So 64 gigs in this day and age I think is a minimum. Alright, so the next consideration is going to be the motherboard. So for this, I actually have a couple of recommendations depending on what your requirements are. So my first choice here is going to be this Asus AMD X570 Plus. This one is a bit more expensive than my second choice, but it does have Wi-Fi. So if we look in the specifications here, you do end up paying more for wireless, but I think it is useful, especially if you don't have an Ethernet cable that's going to run all the way to your router. This might be a good idea for you. It also allows up to 128 gigabytes of memory, whereas a lot of other boards only go up to 64. So if you are trying to allow this to be a bit more future-proofed, you could always double your RAM quite easily if the board accepts it. So this is my first choice. Now my second choice here, this is cheaper on Amazon, is going to be this Asus Strix X470F. This does not come with Wi-Fi and it maxes out at 64 gigs. And for the price difference, I would highly recommend this one. It's going to be a little bit more robust. Okay, so these are my recommendations of that. Of course, you can do your own research, and I'm sure other boards are quite good as well. The next thing is going to be the power supply. Now, when you're looking for a power supply, if you want it to be cheap, I would still go with a modular power supply. If you've ever worked with the non-modular ones, they give you all the wires plugged in, and most of the time you don't need half of them, and it just makes cable management just a nightmare. So for a bit more money, you can get one that is fully modular, $650. Of course, you can go up to like gold, platinum, and you do spend more on those. They are going to be more energy efficient. I mean, looking down the page here, you can see some that are cheaper. These are not fully modular though, so I would look at ones that are fully modular. This Thermaltake one is probably fine as well. I have used Corsair before quite a few times for power supplies, and none of them have ever failed. Next, we're going to go on to hard drives. Now, this is really going to depend on your use case. However, anything less than a 1 terabyte SSD for a boot drive is a mistake in my opinion. Especially if you want to install like the full Adobe suite, 3ds Max, Maya, whatever you're installing, and all the updates, Windows updates. I would definitely go with a 1 terabyte one. Now, the more expensive these are, generally the faster and better that they are, but I would go with just a 860. If you're doing animation or you have a lot of files, I would also grab a secondary hard drive. So I would go with a Seagate 4 terabyte Barracuda drive. I know Seagate sometimes gets a bad reputation, but I've had Seagates and they've been fine. All hard drives fail, but 4 terabytes for $90 I think is a good deal. Now, if you do not need 4 terabytes and you know you do not need 4 terabytes, you could lower this price, grab a 2 terabyte one for $50. This 3 terabyte one is like practically the same amount as the 4 terabyte, so I would just, if you were looking at 3, just pay the extra $8 and go for the 4 terabyte one. Right, this is going to allow you to store a lot of files. Now, these are slower drives, but we are looking for the cheapest thing possible. So if you need a lot of storage, 5400 RPM kind of sucks, but if you just need somewhere to store files, I would go with this one. You can also find ones at 7200 that are obviously going to be much faster, but they are more expensive as well. So I'm always looking for the maximum amount of storage space that I can have, and this is going to give me that. All right, the next thing is graphics. You definitely need a decent GPU, and for this, what I would go with is just an RTX 2070. I would stay away from Quadro cards. They are a lot more expensive for most use cases. You do not need a Quadro card. It'll be fine with just a regular card. I would go with a 270 though. I wouldn't go any lower. The RAM is going to be very important. It's only 8 gigs. A lot of cards have more, but a lot of also have less. So I have a 2080 Ti with only 11. It's a good card. It's probably not worth the money that I paid for it. The 270 here is going to give you quite a bit of power behind it. You can find this as cheap as $407 where I have found, and you also get this aftermarket cooler. These are going to provide better cooling as well. So you might not be able to play games at 4K on the highest settings, but it's going to be a great card for doing rendering. You can even do GPU rendering with it, albeit it's not going to be as good as Quadro cards or as a 2080 Ti or something like that, but it's going to get you where you need to be, especially with this 8 gigs of memory, right? Now, you could always, in the future, double up on graphics cards and maybe do SLI if you needed it. But paying for a 2080 like doubles the price point, but you don't get double the power. And I do have a 2080 Ti, and these are like absurdly priced. I would recommend just the 2070. All right, so we're getting towards the end now, and the next thing is, this is highly subjective, especially for me, because I like computers to be, you know, quite cool and also aesthetically pleasing. So I actually quite like Be Quiet. The company like started out making some really, really quiet fans, and their fans are pretty quiet. I have a Dark Base 700, I think, but there's a newer one, which is a smaller case called the Pure Base 600. And they come in various styles, like you can get ones that have a window, like, let's see, this one over here has a window. This is the one that I would actually pick if I were choosing one of these. It also has the option to install a disk drive, which my case does not have a disk drive, and every time I need a disk, I have to break out the external one, which just kind of sucks. So it is nice having that option kind of built in, that if you wanted to, you could put your own disk drive in there. It's a pretty small case, but what I like about Be Quiet is they are pretty modular, so you can like break them apart pretty easily. Like you can customize hard drive layouts and things like that. If you go with a like dark base 700, you can also flip the orientations. So you could have your window on the right hand side instead of the left hand side, which if your computer is on the right, you'd want the window on the left, but if your computer's on the other side, it's kind of annoying. But if we're looking for budget, I think this is going to be a pretty good case. Now, of course, you can find lots of other cases at a similar price point. What I would look for though is one that you like the look of and one that provides enough cooling. So these cases don't provide the absolute best cooling, but this is still my recommendation for a really cheap case. So the last thing is trying to fit a monitor in our budget. So monitors are quite expensive, and you do normally get what you pay for monitors, but I would recommend just going with a 1440p resolution instead of a 4K. You can save quite a bit of money that way. And if you're only going to have one monitor, I would go with the largest monitor that you can afford. So there is a pretty good deal on this Acer monitor here, which is a 27-inch. Definitely go with the 2K version, not the full HD version. This is going to look a lot better. If you are in some of the labs at school, this is for my students specifically, this is the resolution that it's on, so these are pretty good. Anyway, 27 inches is going to be fairly good. I'd always recommend more monitors if you can afford it and you have the room for it, but 27 inches is going to be good. It's not too big, not too small. And Acer is a good company. I've used them before. IPS display, it's decent. It's not going to be the absolute best monitor that money can buy for sure, but it's going to get you what you need. All right, so final calculation here. If we're using the first choice for the AMD 3900X, we are going to go a little bit over budget, but I do think it's worth it. If we step down to the Ryzen 7 3800X, we can get a little bit closer, and if we also scratch off that extra Seagate hard drive, we can get a bit cheaper as well. We can also fit that a little bit better in budget if we go for the cheaper of the motherboards. However, I think that the first choice is going to be the better option. Unfortunately, this does not cover shipping and tax, but most of the time shipping is not going to be too much of a concern. That's usually included. Tax though is going to increase the price quite a bit, and also doesn't include a mouse and keyboard. So I did my best to try to get this down to 2,000. It's going to go over a little bit in most circumstances, but this should give you a good idea of what to look for if you want to try to get it a bit cheaper yourself. This does not include peripherals like a keyboard and mouse, but I know what I like for peripherals. I know what kind of type of mice I like. You guys have to figure that out. You can pay like almost nothing for a mouse, or you can pay like $100 or more for a mouse. Just depends. I would recommend getting something that you are comfortable with and you like the feel of, because if you're going to be sitting by your computer for long periods of time, you don't want to be using a mouse that sucks. Same thing for the keyboard. I always prefer mechanical keyboards, but there's a huge range of types of keys, and frankly, if you're just trying to get something, that you can do your homework on, you could buy a $10, $20 keyboard from Dell or something, and it's going to be membrane, kind of crappy, but it'll be fine to at least get started with stuff. You can always upgrade your peripherals without any problem later. Anyway, I hope you guys found that useful. As I said, if you'd like to see more of an Intel-based one, or if you think my choices are crap, let me know in the comments. I didn't spend more than a couple hours looking through some stuff. I tried to find the best reviews and best prices, but yeah, this is going to be pretty dynamic and ever changing. But yeah, something that I would look into, especially if you're kind of confined to your house. It doesn't look like campuses are going to be reopening. I know that I'm currently studying computer science, and my university, as UMKC, they have decided to go online for the rest of the semester. So if the situation gets better, we're still staying online. So hopefully not all colleges are going to do this. Maybe the situation will get a lot better, but if you are worried, or you're thinking that you might, if you're kind of on the edge of whether you should or should not get a PC, I would get one. It is going to last you several years. If you intend to pursue this line of work, you really need your own hardware as well. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Have any questions, post a comment. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Peace.